If you're new to our channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. So let's also go to the IV Organics 3-in-1 Plant Guard hotline and bring in our next guest. We're going to go to Washington State. Melissa Norris is a homesteader, podcaster, and blogger, and she loves learning new skills and holding on to the old ones that she's been passed down from. She's a follower of Christ and makes that very aware in her videos and podcasts. Welcome to the program, Melissa.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I thank you for taking time and joining us on the program to share some of your gardening and homesteading wisdom with myself and all of our listeners.
Yeah, I'm always thrilled to talk homesteading and gardening, so this is going to be fun.
Well, you had a cancer scare a couple of years ago, and this is not so long ago. This is something that nobody wants to get news like this. But how did it make you change, or what were some changes that you had that are beneficial now?
Yeah, it was about 8 years ago when I first had my stomach and my upper esophagus. They were biopsied for cancer, and it came back as not being cancer, but was a catalyst for changing pretty much the way we ate. Now, at the time, we already had a vegetable garden, so I grew up, gardening and canning and raising our own beef, and we were already doing that. But I didn't realize that there was still a lot of items in our home from what we were using to clean and the ingredients that I was using to cook from scratch. What I thought was cooking from scratch was still using a lot more convenience items, condensed cans of soup, shortening, those type of things. And so when that happened, I really started to look at the ingredients and the way that food was grown commercially, that we weren't growing ourselves. And so I really started to just change everything. I took out anything that was a GMO product, things that were highly processed, that had hydrogenated oils and fats in them, and really just went back to the old ways. So we started raising our own pigs so I could render my own lard and, of course, our own bacon. And we raise everything organically here on our land. And so we now raise 100% of our own meat and then about 50 to 75% of our vegetables and fruit. So we still do buy things from the grocery store, but it drastically changed the way I cook. And the beautiful thing about that is it really transformed my health. So I was able to get off of all of the prescriptions that I was on for ulcers and stomach acid that was just uncontrollable, and I've never had to go back on them. So it was completely healed of all of that, and it's been going actually on 9 years plus now. We're coming up on that anniversary.
Well, Holly and I, we try to eat organically. We're not, perfect. We try to set an example. But if you read the ingredients in some of these, what we believe to be organic or more healthy products, there's some words in there that it takes a scientist to explain what it really is and how bad it can really be for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we're not 100% perfect either. And I think that's important for people to know that, we do the very, the best that we can on a consistent basis. And every now and then you're going to have something that's, not organic or that is processed. But I think it's more the things that we're putting into our bodies on a daily or a consistent basis that make the most impact. It's not the every now and then. But yeah, you got to be careful when it comes to marketing, because a lot of times they'll put on packages because they know most people want to be healthy and most people want natural. So they'll put in some sneaky wording. So you really have to flip that thing over and look at the ingredient list and read it. And if it's and know what those ingredients are. And if it's simple and it is good, then you're going to know what they are by just reading the ingredient label. When you start to get to those big words, you're like, I have no idea what that means. I can't pronounce that. Probably a good thing. Either do a little bit of research or stay away from it.
Absolutely. And you always want to be proactive instead of reactive. It's much better to try to eat healthy before a problem comes than, okay, I have a problem, now I've got to react and try to change my whole life. And sometimes it doesn't always end the way you want it to.
Yes, that's very true.
You've got a podcast, let's call it a radio show type of thing on your website there. What kind of topics do you cover, and what is the format and the information that people can retain from it?
Yeah, so I have the Pioneering Today podcast, and it's available on my website, which is melissaknorris.com, and, of course, iTunes, Stitcher, any of the podcasting broadcast apps that we've all got. And we cover everything, modern homesteading, self-sufficiency, health, doing it from scratch, all of those old-fashioned traditional skill sets. So we talk about definitely raising your own food with using organic methods, so in the garden. We talk about, of course, from scratch cooking, food preservation, from safe canning to fermenting your food, doing cultured foods. We talk about, organizing your kitchen and your food storage. Pretty much, and we do a lot of it seasonally. So we'll go through, a whole year seasonally on the podcast. And it's usually about 25 to 30-minute show. Pretty much ad-free for the most part, and so we'll just get straight to business. And we bring on special guests, so sometimes there'll be interviews with kind of experts in that field. And most of the time, I am just sharing, the knowledge that I have gained and the way that we do things on the homestead and answering readers' questions. So it's a pretty compact show. You get a lot of information within that episode.
And I want to make it clear, just because you have the name homesteader, that doesn't mean the information is not relatable to people that live in apartments, urban settings, in the city. Homestead, people have the perception, I don't have 4 acres or 10 acres or 100. Forget it, it's not for me. You've got a lot of practical information that people can do in their kitchen, even by buying produce from the farmer's market and bringing in and utilizing that information that you've provided.
Absolutely. And I've got a lot of what I call my apartment homesteaders, and I cover those topics too. So I try to go if you're in an apartment and you've got a window seal, here's the steps that you can take. If you've got a little bit bigger patio, backyard, here's what you can do. If you've got some acreage, here's where you're going to go. So yes, and because homesteading is a state of mind first, and anybody can take homesteading practices and put them into use wherever you are right now.
Many people do garden practices because it's been passed down from their grandparents and down through generations. But now science has proven some of these things to be, let's just call it what it is, a wasted time. There's no proof that it works. You've got a post on your garden, on your website, about garden myths. We love talking about garden myths because we like saving people time. What is one that you found to be very interesting that it was very beneficial to learn from, that you've saved time now not doing it?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I actually, for me, was the most beneficial is I had a really tough time learning how to grow tomatoes. And I always heard that, tomatoes are really easy to grow in containers, and tomatoes are one of the easiest plants here. Everybody just put one on your patio. I had a really tough time with tomatoes, and part of it is I do live in the Pacific Northwest, so normally we get a lot of rain, and tomatoes aren't so keen on getting wet for blight. And so the other problem is I had my tomatoes, I would just have one, a couple of big plants, and I would have them in these containers, and they would never fruit for me. So I was really frustrated. And what I learned is with your tomatoes is they actually really like to have they have a big root system. So if you're going to put them in a container, it needs to be a really deep and large container for their root system. They really do the best too if you can get them in the ground because of that root system. And then once I was able to do that and I got them buried really deep, now we grow a year's worth of tomatoes. I grow about 25 plants, and off those plants, we get enough tomatoes to preserve all of our tomato sauce, all of our stewed tomatoes, all of our salsa, everything, and takes us through the entire year. But the other thing that I didn't realize is they will set their blossom, and obviously that's what their fruit comes from. But part of the problem I had is I had them sheltered because I wanted to keep them out of the rain, didn't want to deal with blight. But they weren't getting the blossoms, they're self-pollinating, so you actually can just have one tomato plant and you will get fruit. But the blossoms need a little bit of air movement, and they weren't getting that because I had them sheltered up against the house. They weren't getting much of a breeze. And so putting them out or just gently shaking them when they have their blossoms will help the pollen inside that blossom, will help it get distributed, and can also help it fruit. And so I learned, it's not maybe necessarily a huge gardening myth, but for me it was it was life-changing because I struggled with the tomatoes, is if you're going to put them in a container, make sure that bad boy is really big and that they've got some airflow.
Absolutely. Many people struggle with growing vegetables in their garden, and they don't know why. And when you start digging into the question, when I start asking questions, have you had a soil test done? No. Well, and we find out that either the soil is too acidic or too alkaline. What are some ways in which we can amend the soil to get it either one or the other, to get it more balanced for many of the vegetables in which we grow in our gardens?
Yeah, that is a really good thing to bring up, because a lot of people don't realize that is the issue. And I highly agree, getting a soil test is going to give you the absolute most accurate results so that you really know how much to amend and what you're lacking in. And this actually falls under our gardening this very well, because a lot of times if you need to increase the acidity of your soil, there's a lot of times you'll see recommendations of adding, peat moss and coffee grounds and different things. And peat moss and coffee grounds have some wonderful things that they can help and do with our soil. But when it comes to actually increasing your acidity level, they don't really do such a hot job on that. And so the best thing that you're going to give you the most reliable and to make sure is that you get elemental sulfur. So this is the most reliable. And as long as you get elemental sulfur, don't just get gardening sulfur, because then that can have aluminum in it. Make sure it says elemental sulfur in it. That is going to help increase your pH level. And you also want to make sure when you apply it to your soil that you never try to increase it more than 1% in a calendar year. So you're only going to be able to move it one. So say your soil is at a 7 on the pH scale and you need to get it down to a 6. Don't ever try to, lower it all the way down to like a 5.5 or a 5 in 1 year. Just go slowly. And then on the flip side, if your soil is too acidic and you need to make it more alkaline, or sometimes you'll hear people say they need to sweeten the soil, an organic option that works really good is using lime. Now, there's some varying viewpoints on this. Lime is usually made from crushed limestone versus ground up oyster shells. So both of these are a way that we can amend our soil. Both are going to increase your alkalinity, but if your soil, and this is where having your soil tested so you know what it's lacking in, if your soil already has a high magnesium level, then you don't want to use lime. Instead, you're going to want to go the route of ground up oyster shells.
Absolutely. Well, Melissa, we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day to share your garden knowledge and homesteading knowledge with all of us. How can our listeners find out more about you and, again, get those podcasts that you have on your website?
Yeah, everything is at melissaknorris.com. You'll see the button there for the Pioneering Today podcast. You can listen to it straight on the website, of course, on iTunes or Stitcher, any of those. And I look forward to helping everybody grow a great garden.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa. We greatly appreciate your time. And
Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for checking out the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener radio show. For more, go to the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com for full-length in-studio video and podcast replay of Season 1. Season 2 underway and added weekly. Tweet us at TWVG Show or hashtag TWVG to be part of the program.